Hey, it's Yay for Yarn, and today I'm going to show you how to make a basic hat on your Addie King knitting machine. So let's get started. I'm going to use worsted weight yarn for this. You can use bulky weight if you like. I'm going to use worsted. I've even seen people make hats out of sport weight yarn, so you can do that too if you want. And I have my Addie King here. I'm in circular knitting mode. And I'm going to start by casting on, and I'm going to be using a long tail cast on. So I'm going to put a slip knot on my first black needle and cast on all the way around the machine using a long tail cast on. And if you want to learn how to do this, then you can go and watch my how to do a long tail cast on your Addie knitting machine video, and that will show you how to do a long tail cast on. Alright, so there is my long tail cast on, and the reason I'm using a long tail cast on is because for an application like this where we're only using, normally in a reversible hat, there is no edge to it. The edge is actually just folded knitting because you make, a reversible hat, so you just knit into the inside. But with a single layer hat like this, you're going to have an edge around the circumference of the head. That is going to be your cast on edge. And with a long tail cast on, or even an E-wrap cast on if you want, you have the option to tighten up the cast on once it's finished. Because when you do a cast on the machine, when you take it off the machine, then that edge is going to be looser than what it is on the machine, because the machine, is bigger around than what the finished circumference of the tube is going to be. So with a long tail cast on or an E-wrap cast on, I have videos on both of those, you can tighten up the edge of your cast on after you've already done all the knitting. So that's why we're using this. And now that I've got my cast on all the way around, I'm back to my first black needle. I'm going to zero out my row counter, and I'm going to knit about 4 to 5, maybe even 6 rows of ribbing. So I'm going to go ahead and knit my 4 or 5 rows, and then I'm going to rib them, and I do have a video on that as well if you want to go check that out. Alright, so I've knit my 5 rows, and now I'm going to rib those 5 rows. And if you want to learn how to do this, go check out my how to knit ribbing on your Addie knitting machine video. So now my ribbing is all finished, and now we're going to knit the main part of the hat. But first I want to talk about sizing. Here I have a styrofoam hat model here, and sizing can be a little bit difficult with a hat of this nature if you can't measure the recipient's head. But if you can, the best way to make the hat the correct size is to measure from the base of the ear on one side, not across the top of the head, not across the back of the head, but across the crown, approximately here, about a 45-degree angle. And you want to measure all the way around to the base of the other ear. And you're going to divide that number in half, and that is going to be the length that you want your total finished hat to be. Now, these are a few standard hat measurements. There is no set standard on the Craft Yarn Council of America's website as far as hat length. But, so this is going to be approximate, but for a toddler, you're going to do approximately 7 to 7.5 inches. For a child, approximately 7.5 to 8. For a woman's hat, you're going to do approximately 8 to 8.5. And for a man, approximately 8.5 to 9. Now, again, if you can measure the person's head, that would be ideal. But if you can't, those are some approximate guidelines to go by. And that's going to be the finished length of your tube. Again, if you're measuring the person's head, you want to take your number from the base of the ear on one side across the crown to the base of the ear at the other side and divide that number in half. That's going to be the length of your total finished tube. Now you're also going to want to keep in mind that the actual length of the hat when it's on is going to be affected by the weight of yarn you're using and the tension, the gauge that you're using with that yarn. Because if the hat is being stretched further to accommodate a larger head circumference, then it's going to shrink in length. So you do want to keep that in mind, especially if you're doing a larger hat. You want to make sure that it's long enough so that when you stretch it to the approximate head circumference, that it will still be long enough, because as you stretch it this way, then it's going to shrink a little bit in length. So now I'm going to knit the main part of the hat, and I'm going to just keep knitting in stockinette stitch, the regular stitch that the Addi makes, until my hat is to the length that I want it to be, and I will show you how to measure it when I get there. Alright, so here is, this is my estimate of where I'm going to stop and measure. And what you want to do first is stretch the knitting lengthwise, because as it's on the machine, it's being stretched widthwise, which shrinks it lengthwise. So you want to stretch it lengthwise a little bit. And we're going to be measuring from the cast on edge to the needles. And you also want to be aware that when it's still on the machine, it's going to be a little bit shorter than what it actually is when you take it off, because this part up around here is going to be stretched widthwise. So these last few rows up here are actually longer than what they appear to be, but this is the approximate length that I'm going for. So I'm going to go ahead and take my yarn out of the yarn guide, sink the last white needle, and I'm going to leave a tail, cut the yarn. I've got about 18 inches of a tail, that's plenty. I'm going to thread it onto my yarn needle, and I'm going to pick up the stitches all the way around onto the remainder of this yarn. Alright, so I've picked up all my stitches. Going to give it a good lengthwise stretch, and then I'll show you how to finish it up. So here's what I've got so far. You can see, how it fits the hat model here, and you can also see that this edge right here is very loose and has a lot of lengths of yarn running across the edge that are not very attractive. So we're going to tighten those up, and we're also going to close up the end here. So once you take it off the machine, it's going to look something like this. And so you're going to want to pull on the yarn, cinch it closed, tighten up that hole, and then you're going to bring your yarn to the inside through that hole in the center. You're going to want to pull on it to make it as tight as you possibly can. Now, remember, if you're using a yarn that does not have a whole lot of tolerance to being pulled on really hard, because some yarns sometimes have fiber, the yarn will just break if you pull too hard, then don't pull it hard enough that the yarn will break. But if you still have a hole here and you don't like it, you can always just, kind of close it up extra by stitching back and forth across it with your yarn needle. And that will block that hole. It'll kind of close it up where that you can't see that there's a hole there. There we go. So now you're going to tie a knot underneath. I already tied a knot after I cinched it, and before I stitched the hole closed, I'm going to tie another knot, and I'm going to weave in ends. So now we're going to take care of this messy edge down here, and we're going to tighten up our long tail cast on. So first of all, you can see where my tail is coming from. That's the last stitch we cast on. The one next to it is the first stitch we cast on. So you're going to find there should be a strand of yarn here running along the edge that when you pull on it, it should close up your slip knot. And when you make your cast on in the first place, it's always a good idea to use the yarn that is the long tail part for the part that goes around your thumb. The yarn that goes around your thumb, you want that long tail running over your thumb so that when you get to the end, then you can just pull on that long tail, which is running along the edge, and tighten up that slip knot. Now we're going to just go along the edge, pulling on these long floats of yarn that go along the edge, and that is going to tighten up our edge here. And as you can see, this little section I've already done right here already looks much neater. So I'm just going to keep doing this all the way around. If you want more detail on how to do this, you can go and watch my how to do a long tail cast on video. Alright, so I'm already pretty much all the way back around to the end, and I'm just going to pull on that yarn tail to take up all the slack, and now you can see how much neater that edge is. And now what I'm going to do is take the yarn needle and I'm going to join the edges of this cast on together. As you can see right here, there's a little bit of a split in the edge where this is the beginning of the cast on and this is the end. So I'm going to see this slip knot right here, and I'm going to insert my needle. I've got my tail yarn on that needle into the knot part of the slip knot. The little lump at the bottom that looks like the knot, that is what you want to put it into. And just make sure that yarn runs through there. And there is your finished cast on edge. Now you just need to weave in your ends. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. If you make this project, let me know how it turns out for you in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, making sure you click the little bell next to the subscribe button to be notified of new videos. Thanks for watching. Bye.